Do you feel overwhelmed by the demands of life? Do you feel like you're not enough to meet expectations? Do you instinctively know that there's more to life than just producing and consuming, but you don't know what to do to get it? I'm here to help you. This is the Dr.Chérie Show, and I'm your host, the mother of coaching since 1974. I help Fortune 500 companies, individuals, and couples find happiness through emotional safety. I'll teach you what you need to do to have focus, empowerment, and to create emotional safety to carve out the path to your happiness and have the life you deserve. Let's get started. Welcome. I'm Dr. Chérie, and this is Dr. Cherie's podcast. I'm the mother of coaching, and I create emotional safety for people. And my guest today is Tracey O'Malley. Now, this is an extraordinary person, and she does something that I think is going to be really interesting for you to hear about, because what she does is she helps people recover from a variety of different things. Recovery is one of her specialties. She also deals with overwhelm. I know that that's some of your middle names. So if overwhelm is something that you're dealing with, today is a do not miss. In addition to that, she does something called soul surgery, and we're going to find out about that together. So hang on while I bring Tracey O'Malley into view with you. Welcome, Tracey.
Hi, Dr. Chérie. So excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on, and I want you to start by telling us why the world around us is filled with overwhelm.
Oh my goodness. I think, today especially, we live in a society, in a world where, all these shiny objects, we have it at our fingertips at a moment's notice. And, when we have this stuff that we've carried with us through however many decades we've been around, clouding that, we see something we want and then we go after it. And then, the beliefs and the emotions come in telling us that we can't do that. So we move on to the next thing or the next thing or the next thing. And it's like this tornado hurricane effect in our lives. Yet we're smiling through it all and slapping a filter on ourselves, suppressing it even more. And I think that facade that we're trying to upkeep really is wreaking havoc on our emotions, spiritually, emotionally, physically, financially. This affects people when you're running around like a hurricane. And it's one of those things where I was that, so I understand. Yeah, oh yeah. Looking back and doing my own soul surgery, it makes sense why that was the way it was.
Okay, so you do recovery work, but why don't we start back to maybe some defining moments in your life that were illuminating for you to be able to say, maybe this is who I am or what I'm supposed to do. Tell me about those.
The first one happened when I was around 9 or 10, and I grew up in a very passionate, in quotation marks, alcoholic home. And my dad was a very high functioning alcoholic, and my mom was the classic codependent, emotionally unavailable, could barely get out of bed kind of mom. So she was a physical body in the house, but was completely not there. I took care of my little sister from the age of 5 or 6. I remember doing that. And by the time I was 9 or 10, things had gotten pretty rough in our house, very unstable.
When you say pretty rough, what does that mean to you?
It was, you never knew what you were going to get. So I was kind of always bracing for impact. My role, my self-proclaimed role in the house was the peacemaker, and really being able to identify every situation and do as much damage control ahead of time. So when all hell broke loose, I could just go into that role. At 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, this was my role.
And when hell broke loose, what would happen?
Things could get violent. Things would be thrown, holes in the wall, lots of yelling, putting us in a car with, drinking parents behind the wheel, that kind of thing, So
was it both parents going at each other, or was it mostly one parent?
It got to the point where my mom didn't engage for a long time. And then she got to the point where like, if you can't beat them, join them. And that's when things like started to really erupt.
And how old were you then?
I was like 9 or 10. Okay. And, it was at a time that I also got my period at 10 years old. So that brought a whole another thing. And my mom didn't know about it for 3 years. At 10 years old was the first time that I remember stealing food to numb out and comfort myself, because obviously I couldn't buy the food in the household because I was 10. And I remember one Sunday morning, people used to say, thank goodness it's Friday. And I remember that like my stomach would get knots. I had migraines and ulcers by the time I was in early grade school.
Oh.
I know. And I remember one Sunday morning, that's when my parents would usually sleep off whatever was going on over the weekend. And it was the quietest time of the week. And one Sunday morning, it was pouring rain out, and I got on my bike and started driving around in the middle of the rain from church to church within a few miles radius of our home. And I remember walking in, I was searching for something. This had to matter for something. Even at the age of 10, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Why is this happening? What is this for? And I rolled up to I can't remember the church, but I rolled in. And today, if a 10-year-old walked into a church today, soaking wet all by herself, I'm sure police would be called or something. But I walked into this church like a little drowned rat, and like the whole room parted. And I remember looking up at this person, and they asked me, why are you here? And I just said, I don't know. And I was handed my first Bible at that moment. And, I knew that this had to mean something, all this uncertainty and pain and fear that I had, obviously it would take decades for me to figure that out. But even at the age of 10, I knew that there had to be a grander purpose for everything I was going through. And so fast forward 30 years later, I kind of got to really take that to the next level.
Well, when you say take it to the next level, what happened 30 years later?
So 30 years later, I got a call one summer evening. And by this point, I was a divorced single mother, working a job that she didn't like, but it put food on the table. I wasn't receiving child support. I had just turned 40 years old. I was drinking also, very high functioning. We repeat what we are taught, told, and modeled. And everything I didn't want to become, I had become. And my kids were 14 and 15 at the time. And I started to see them act out and feel a lot of the things I felt as a child.
Oh, that must have been devastating.
It was. And, this is why I'm so passionate about recovery work, because, this generational cycle is so real. And I went out of my way in every way to not be what I grew up with. And I turned into that. And I knew I needed to stop it, but I just didn't have the toolbox to do that. And so when I turned 40, one summer night, I get a phone call from my dad, and who, I love him very much. He was very high. Some of the greatest things about me come from him, and some of the not so great things about me come from him. And he called to say that he was just diagnosed with cancer, and they didn't give him much time. And 12 days later, he passed away.
Oh, God.
So that life is too short, 2x4 came up and whacked me upside the head. And it was at that moment that I was like assessing and taking an inventory of my life. I had a lot of life to live. I was 40 years old, and I knew with whatever I had been equipped with wasn't going to cut it. And I didn't want this for my kids. I didn't want this same cycle for my kids, but I really didn't know what to do with that. And because of how I grew up, I was not trusting of many people. I had, the metaphoric wall in front of me pretty much.
So what did you do to break through the wall and to be able to just take a hold of your life? Because you were in a pattern, and I know a lot of people, and probably some of you people out there are listening going, God, that's me. I'm stuck in that same kind of pattern. What did you do to break out or break through that?
I believe that you have to have a moment in your life. It's like the fork in the road. And it's either I do what I've always done and get what I've always gotten, or wipe out the hard drive and completely start over. And, you know, I'd always said, well, that's just who I am. That's how I was raised. And it was in that moment that I was like, okay, I don't want this to go on. And I legitimately decided that I was going to wipe out everything I had known. I walked into my very high level career and resigned. I picked up the phone and called a friend and asked for help, which I don't do. I decided that I needed a whole new toolbox. And, you know, prior to this, 12 years, I had been in therapy, you know, trying to unpack a lot of this. You know, when I had children,
Sure.
it was very defining, like, oh my goodness, I saw myself and my kids. And so for 12 years prior, I had started to chip away at this, but I couldn't kind of get there. And so when I lost my dad, I knew that I needed to really be all in and not just take it into my own hands when it wasn't going my way. So, you know, I walked into my career and said, I'm not coming back, because if I do, it's just a matter of time before I end up back here. I called a friend who had a few years of sobriety under her belt, and I said, I need help. And so I walked in after having a conversation with my 14 and 15-year-old, telling them, when I come back, everything's going to be different. And I mean it. And I could tell they didn't completely trust that. You know, my track record wasn't always great. And my son said, I'll give you up for 30 days so we can have you the rest of our life. And so
I stayed with them when you went into recovery?
Their dad. They went and stayed with their dad. Yeah. Which I didn't really want. You know, things at the time between him and I were not great. But, you know, the surrendering wasn't a strength of mine before. But again, I was like committed to changing everything. And that meant surrendering to even that. Yeah. And so I walked into recovery and I vowed to put every card on the table, to not leave anything out, you know, because, you know, therapy and coaching, it's only as good as you are honest, right?
Absolutely. Totally. And you actually put yourself in recovery. You walked in there, you walked away from your kids and you put them with their dad. And you said, this is my moment. I'm going to change my life today. That's so brave, courageous, incredible. Tracey, I'm so impressed with you. I mean, to check yourself into recovery, to get your boys taken care of, and to say to yourself with that determination, today's the day I'm going to change my life. My God, what can you tell our listeners and viewers to be able to help them make that step forward that you made? Because you are a role model to thousands, if not millions of people who look to you and say, my God, if you could do it, maybe there's hope for me.
100%. If I can do it, trust me, anybody can do it. I mean, I was born and raised to drink and fight. And if I can come into this world now not doing either, that's a miracle in of itself. So, you know, I think that sometimes when we're in the storms of life, we allow ourselves to just get tossed and turned and flipped around up in it. And if you are in a storm, I want you to know that some of those storms can be just the absolute most perfect storm for the biggest breakthrough of your life. And it was in the middle of that, the biggest storm, that I realized that, you know, there could be something really good to this. You know, after the storms always comes the rainbows and all the beauty that comes from rain, and, you know, growth comes from rain. Trees get their roots when the rain comes. And so thankfully, you know, I just knew it was time. I saw how fast 12 days my dad had to process that he wasn't going to be here. And at the end of his days, all he wanted was more time and to go back and undo some of the things he had done, said, whatever. And I didn't want to wait till I was at that position to do that. And so when I was in recovery, the very first day, I put all my cards on the table. You know, I didn't just struggle with alcohol. Obviously, I told you when I was 10, I started stealing food. So I had extreme disordered eating, whether it was binging or restricting. And I knew that that was equally as powerful as the alcohol problem. And here's the thing, addiction is just the symptom of deep-rooted trauma.
Yeah.
And I was realizing that, because even if I took the alcohol out, then there was the food. If I took the food out and the alcohol, then there was the power tripping and all the other things that we bounce around to. And
Yeah.
in recovery, I heard the statistic of how many of us will actually have sobriety, and emotional sobriety for me is what was most important. And I heard the statistic was around 2%.
And tell me what emotional sobriety, how do you define that?
Emotional sobriety to me is being able to regulate your emotions without a substance, without attachments, without anything outside of yourself. That, yeah, like for me, no matter what happens in my life, I don't have to react. I can process. Because I believe this, I'm not sure what you feel about this, but any of the triggers that happen in our life have nothing to do with what's actually right in front of you. It has to do with unresolved stuff and
Earlier
healing.
similar.
Yeah. Healing that still needs
Exactly.
to happen. And so in recovery, when I heard the statistics of 2%, I kind of looked around the room and did some math. And the very first words I spoke in recovery was an apology to everyone else. Because I told them none of them were going to make it because I was the 2%.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. That's great.
I didn't make any friends that day, but sadly I was accurate. You know, my roommate in recovery ended up passing away 14 months later
Oh, wow.
from an alcohol overdose. And so I knew that this was serious. And I knew that if I wanted a better life for my children, it was going to require me to change everything. And so that's when the defining moment started. I literally wiped out the hard drive and started the rebuild of my motherboard, so to speak,
Yeah.
at the age of 40.
So your dad's alert that he had cancer with 12 days to live was your wake up call to say, the one thing he wants more of is time. I have time, but am I going to use my time well? Am I going to use it smartly? Am I going to make a change? And you woke up and you just took a hold of the situation and you said, that's it. I'm done with this life. I'm starting over. It's a reboot.
It's a
Wow.
reboot. And, you know, I know that so many of your listeners are thinking, yeah, I want to do that too, but how do you do it?
Exactly.
And it starts, you know, I love the acronym, how: honest, open, and willingness. And, you know, I've always believed in a divine purpose and a divine power. And there were many times where, you know, we lean into that when we are struggling. And when it isn't going how we expect it to go, we start saying, okay, I'm going to play my own deck of cards here and just start taking the wheel. And it was in that surrender that I told you wasn't a strength of mine, that I knew that as long as I was doing the right thing, eventually everything would work out. And it would probably not look at all how I expected it to. And I would have to just trust that, because clearly my way of doing things wasn't working so well.
Yeah. Yeah. So you really wanted to be able to find another option, another solution. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about soul surgery,
Mm-hmm.
what does that look like, and how do you define it?
So in soul surgery, like I said, I think any of the things that, you know, whether it's a drug addiction or food addiction or codependency or, you know, any of the things that we use to cope or numb out, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
for nurturing or numbing, it is just a symptom. And when I was like, why are the statistics so crappy in recovery? Why?
Yeah, yeah,
And,
really.
and you know, and it's just like, what I found in a lot of recovery out there was they just kind of like teach you to get rid of the stuff, the surface level stuff. And it's just a matter of time. And yes, you can have short-term success, but it's not sustainable if you don't get to the root. It's just like, you know, if you've got a beautiful garden and you see weeds, and instead of yanking them up by the root, you just get out the chemicals and spray them at the surface and they'll die, but they
Right.
come back bigger, stronger, faster, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that the way recovery is being treated out in the world is very much like, you know, the spray. And I know the reason that I've had the success in recovery that I have, going on almost 7 years now.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Best thing I've ever done. Is because of my willingness and my openness and my honesty to really get to the root. That meant going back to the parts of my childhood that were the most painful, where the belief system that I wasn't good enough was born, where the belief system that I had to be perfect in order to have acceptance, love, validation, and worth. And a lot of people have either suppressed it or it's so painful they don't want to go back there. You know, I have sexual assault history in my past too. There were a lot of painful places I needed to revisit. And I think that we hear the term let the past go, and in theory that's great, because yes, we don't want to linger a long time in it. However, to change the belief system around our operating, we have to go back to the places where it was birthed, and most of the time it was before we were 10 years old. And so in soul surgery, in my own, I went back to the places, some of the places I didn't even have in my conscious memory because I had suppressed them for so long.
Oh, and did you do that by yourself, or did you do that with a guide or a therapist? How did you go back to suppressed memories that you couldn't even remember?
Well, I've had the same therapist since recovery. So when I went into recovery, and I was really honest with her for 7 years, she has been there for me, you know, and there's been periods where it hasn't been as intense, but those early days, I was like, I want to get to the root of this. And so we did things like EMDR, and that helped bring the memories up without so much intense emotions attached to it.
Yeah.
And even in that, what I've seen with other people who have done EMDR though, is unless you build the toolbox on how to deal with what comes up, it's kind of like, what are you opening up? And so, you know, like I said, between therapy and other modalities, there wasn't a one size fits all. And I think that's why we struggle with so much addiction out there, is because there's this, a lot of one way is the highway. Or if you don't do it this way, it's just a matter of time. And so I was really passionate about helping people really get to the depths of their soul and dissecting the past so that they could master their genius and their purpose that they're divinely put here for.
Lovely. I love it. And I think you and I were sisters, because I think we had the same parents, actually. Because I also grew up in an alcoholic home, and there was also domestic violence as well. So I recognize a lot of the things that you say because they resonate. And I think I'm a little bit your older sister, but that's okay. That's all right. So I want to know, okay, so now we're sisters for sure. What would you, if people want to find you and they want to be able to do some work on overwhelm, recovery work, they wanted to have the soul surgery experience, how do they find you?
Yes, so you can hit up TraceyO'Malley.com. All the info is there. I'm doing a free webinar series on overwhelm. I'm not selling anything on it. It's just to add value and give you a few tools for your toolbox. You know, it's the most important ones on the surface, you know, to get through the harder days and a beginning of the understanding why you're so overwhelmed and how that's affecting, you know, all the areas of your life. So TraceyO'Malley.com is a great place. And also I'm on Instagram at Tracy_O'Malley. I'm in there a lot doing stories and showing you my life and in real time, because here's the thing. This is what's so fascinating about this work in the world we live in today is, like I said, it's a very much, I want it now world.
Absolutely. Nanoseconds.
Right. And this kind of work is not a check the boxes kind of thing. And I'm here to tell you, it is an ongoing, multi-layered, faceted process of this surgery, you know, and with any kind of wound or a break, right? Sometimes when we break a bone, we have to go in and re-break it in order for it to heal properly.
Right.
And sometimes in soul surgery, we have to go in and re-break our heart a little bit for it to recover.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you, you can recover. You can.
Oh gosh, this is really exciting. And I really hope that you listeners out there and who are watching and witnessing this wonderful podcast with Tracey take advantage of what she has to offer, because it's very, very special. And I really want to thank you for the great work that you're doing in helping people heal the past and launch their life by leading the way. You're leading by example, and that's what better example is there in the world than you being a leader. It really makes a difference.
Yeah,
So I want to thank you for that. It's very special. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with in terms of like a step out of overwhelm or one piece of advice that you want to give to our audience?
Yes. I've got like, it's part of like a 3-step thing. And most of us are in the awareness phase or heading into the awareness phase. And, you know, a lot of coaching and personal development out there brings you into awareness. But I think where we are missing the box or missing the mark is acknowledging the effects it has or your part in it, even when we've been wronged. And then taking action. We want a result, so we take action. But here's the part that's missing is compassionate, effective action.
That's great. If you were to define compassionate, effective action in one sentence, what would that be?
Not beating yourself up.
Hey, I love it. Okay.
And not hiding in shame. No more shame lanes for you.
That's great. Absolutely great. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I look forward to seeing you in the future. Tracey
It's been an honor.
O'Malley, you are a treat and you're doing such great work for the world. Thank you again for being on my show. I love it.
My pleasure.
For the rest of you, I want to say, don't forget Sunday mornings in Asia and Saturday nights in the US and Europe, you're in the middle of the night. We have happy hour happening every week with my partner, husband, life soulmate, Michael. And we get on and we talk about everything about relationships and how to be able to be kind and generous and loving and have gratitude with your spouse, your mate, and be able to get over the hurdles you're encountering. And don't forget Living Life as a Coach. It's my monthly subscription series that you don't have to be a coach. You're interested in coaching, you want to know about coaching, once a month I will interview a master certified coach who has had the experience of going through their discovery of their life purpose and really going for their dreams. So that's another thing to be able to be looking for. So I thought this was great. I know you did as well. And again, thank you, Tracey, and see you next time. So thanks again for tuning in. Bye for now.